kubectl delete. So I'll delete the deployment. Okay, it will automatically delete all the pods. Okay, but deleting the pod will not delete the deployment, but deleting the deployment will delete all the pods. Okay, that's the simple logic. I'm deleting all the services. So you also keep on doing this cleanup while performing the next exercise. Okay, so now everything will be clean. Now kubectl get all. Okay, like all will give the pod services deployment replica sets. Okay, if you want to see the namespaces, what is namespace, I will explain. Kubectl get namespace. Okay, so by default you will see this 4 namespaces. Okay, and we till now we were working on the default namespace, and how to check if it was a default namespace or not. I'll just give you the command, that is kubectl config get context. Okay, so if you run this command kubectl config get context, it is showing uh, so as this is the fresh installation, it is not giving the default namespace name, but this is the default namespace, I know that. So I was working in a default namespace, and to get the details of the default namespace, as we are already in the default namespace, just do kubectl get all. Okay, it will give the details of default namespace, or we can also add it here, -n namespace, give the details of the default namespace, like this. As there is nothing in it, it is showing only the cluster IP service, but we can check the kube system. Okay, this is created by Kubernetes itself, so it has some details like this. It has 3 pods running inside it. Okay, and we do not touch it because it is created by Kubernetes system. Similarly, we can create our own namespaces. So let's do this exercise. So what we are doing is, so why we need Kubernetes namespaces? Suppose we have an environment called development, staging, and production. So we can do the segregation that development namespaces, pods in development namespaces will not interfere with the staging, and the staging will not interfere with the production, and we have a isolation and separation. Okay, and we can give an access only to few developers to development namespace, and very limited access only to the architect or a DevOps engineer only to production namespace. So that also we can do using namespace. So there is a need for namespaces, and the command to get the details of the namespaces is kubectl get namespace, or we can also write namespace, ns or namespace. So this is giving whatever namespaces available on the cluster. Okay. Now we are creating 2 new namespaces. Okay, one is dev, that is development, and other one is prod. Now if you do the run the command kubectl get namespace, we can see it has created 2 namespaces, dev and prod. Now let's check again kubectl get context. It will show in which namespace I am, because as of now uh, it is still not reflected, but we will set it as default one. So we get the context using get context. We set the context means we'll tell the Kubernetes cluster that now I want my default namespace to be default. Now if I do again get context, okay, now I am in a default namespace. You should give it by default as well. Now whatever commands I run after setting the context, it will be for that particular namespace. Now again what we will do is we'll set the context for development namespace, and if I do get context, It will show that I am in a development namespace, and if you remember, we don't have anything in the development namespace, so it will be empty. No resources found in development namespace. Similarly, if you set it to prod, okay, get context, we are in a prod namespace. Here also we have not created anything. Now what we will do is we will set the context to prod, or what we'll do is we'll set the context to the default one. Just get the context. Okay, we are in a default namespace, and if you do kubectl get all, we only have the service. Now let's create something inside the default namespace. I am in a default namespace, so while creating the deployment, I'll give the name itself as default namespace. Okay, so I've given the default namespace so that it becomes easy for us to check. Remember, we are in which namespace? We are in a default namespace, and now I've created something in the default namespace, and if I do kubectl get all, I can see I've created an nginx deployment. Now if I go set context to dev, now I'm inside the development namespace, and if I do kubectl get all, it is again empty because I've created this deployment in a default namespace, not in a development namespace. Now I'll create the same thing in the development namespace as well. Now as I'm in a development namespace, I'm creating one more deployment. And if I do kubectl get all, I can see it is creating in which namespace. Again, if we don't remember, just use the command get context. Now let's go inside the prod namespace, set the context to prod. Okay, now we are in a prod namespace. If you do kubectl get all, we won't see anything. Okay. Now let's create the prod development deployment, and if I see, now I am in a prod namespace. So what we have to do is every time we have to set the context. Okay, now if I do to dev, then I can see the development details. So again, if you want, if we set it to default get all, it will show the default namespace, but setting and it is a bit cumbersome to set and get. Okay, so one of the method would be kubectl -n, okay, default get all. Rather than doing all these things again and again, I'll see that now get the details, all the details of default namespace. So it is showing me the deployment of default. Then if you want to see the details of development namespace, it will show dev, the development. And if you want to see for prod, you can also see for prod. So -n or hyphen namespace is very important. We can directly do that. And if we want to create one more deployment, okay, so this is a deployment for prod, and if I don't want to go inside the prod namespace and do that, I'll just add here -n that create it in the prod namespace. But here we'll have to add number 2 because the name will conflict. Okay, so what I'm doing here is in -n prod means create something in prod namespace. Similarly, if I add here dev, so whatever in whatever namespace you may be, if you add -n, we can create that particular resource in that particular namespace. Okay, and if I add it here default, I can also have default to, actually it should have been 2, but it's okay, default 2. Now just see it, get, okay, where we are in a default namespace. We should always be in the default namespace. After completing the exercise, make sure you are in a default namespace. So if I do kubectl get all for default, I'll see 2 containers, okay, the default and default 2. Similarly, if I want to check for development, we'll have dev, okay, and for prod also we can check. So -n is more important, but we should also know that we can also set the context or get the context. Suppose we do not, we will be always working on a dev, then set it as dev and keep on working. Then you don't have to add -n option. Okay, and if you want to get the details of all the namespaces, -all name spaces we can use. Okay, so it will show default we have 2 deployments, dev we have 2 deployments, cube system is also having some deployments, and prod have 2 deployments. So if we add -, all namespaces, it will give details for all the namespaces. Okay, so this was all about the namespace.